Okay, today what I'm going to be doing is getting these two doors ready for paint. I stripped them down to bare metal. I filled with steel the holes for the mirrors and did a little bit of a body filler to get them smooth and shot some primer on them. I always like to strip down to bare metal, but it's not always necessary to do, depending on the quality of finish work that you want. If you want a show car finish, it's always best to strip down to bare metal. If you're just doing this for commercial reselling of a vehicle, then I don't recommend stripping them down to bare metal. It's extremely time consuming. These two holes here are for the C3 Corvette door mirrors that I'm going to put on this car, on this van. Some of the things that you're going to experience after doing body work and primering, if you're going to be using a lacquer primer like I always use. The lacquer in the primer is used to reduce the primer to a consistency where you can spray it. And lacquer is extremely strong, so what it winds up doing to the filler underneath, it could actually cause lifting, which is also called a reaction.
And when I say lacquer in the primer, I'm referring to lacquer thinner.
Hopefully that's coming out good on this camera and you can see this, but there's a little bit right here and a little bit right here. Now this isn't really something to worry about. Also, a little bit right here, you can see a little bit of the filler underneath. And a little bit right here. This stuff is all going to disappear. And what does not disappear, we will go ahead and use glazing spot putty. And we will lightly sand that again. But also the primer, I applied it very thick, and I like to apply it very wet. It gives a much better appearance, and it makes it closer to spray ready, so you don't have to sand so much also. But again, you can see where the mark is right there for the reaction. And in this particular case, I actually primered it. I had a reaction. I primered just the area of the reaction a second time. And primer this is high build primer, so if there's any slight low spot, this primer will actually fill that spot. We're only talking a few mils. You can always use a guide coat also. And the guide coat is just, I have some over here. I'll show you what that looks like. This is a dry guide coat. And basically all it is a foam pad, and it's like a little powder that you just swipe back and forth, and then you block sand it. And after you block sand it, any powder will remain in the low spots. And again, you can use the glazing and spot putty to fill those low spots and then reprime. And see, in this particular case, the little area that did react is 100% gone. So I will not even need to use the glazing and spot putty because there's nothing there to fix. It was just north of this little area, which I haven't sanded yet. You can still see a little reaction there. Yeah, see, it's completely gone. It can no longer be seen. It can no longer be felt. Yep, completely gone. So anyway, this is going to be resprayed white. Also, another benefit to painting a vehicle white is white hides pretty much everything. Unless it's extreme. If it's extreme, it won't hide it. So, what I always set out to do is I always set out to paint a car black, even if I'm going to paint it white, because black actually shows everything. If you're going to paint a car black, you must have a virtually perfect body. A paint job is only as good as the body work underneath it. That's the tip of the day. Paint job is only as good as the body work underneath it. I mean, you can spend $1,000 on materials, on paint materials, but then if you put it on a body that has been poorly prepped, you're going to have a lousy paint job. Even if you're not that great of a painter and you paint on a perfect body using the best materials, and you get a run or two, or if you get dust in the paint, that stuff can be buffed out, wet sanded and buffed out. And what I like to do is I like to start off with around 800 grit sandpaper, wet sand it. Any kind of imperfections in the paint will come off pretty quickly with 800, and then I bump it up to 1200, and then from there I go up to 2000 grit, and that takes off any imperfections left or scratches in the surface left over from the 800 grit sandpaper. And it's always much better to do as I'm doing with a block sander as opposed to by hand on the final cut for the primer prior to paint.
Also, you want to notice when I'm using that sander, I avoid the corner ridge here. You don't want to sand that ridge. If you just scrape it just a few times, you're going to take the primer all the way down to metal again. Then you have to prime again. So I do not rub the edge at all, at least on the corner portion of the edge. Also, you can use a longboard block sander to do this. It makes the job go faster.
And if you get a run through like this, you can take a little bit of primer on your finger and just tap it, and then once it dries, just go over it again lightly, knowing that that is a little bit of a high spot. You don't want to go over it too harsh because it'll just come right back. And you'll be doing this kind of sanding forever. So as you recall, there was 2 holes, one here, one about here, and I believe the other one was right here. And the way to fill these holes, and I realize that a lot of you that are just doing this, one time are not going to have access to a tool like this. And this is just a tool that I made real quick out of a lathe part. This was to center out a piece of metal on a lathe, or to hollow out a piece of metal on the lathe. But what it is just a punch. And the punch is to take a piece of steel, the approximate diameter, thickness of the actual steel that you're working on. You take the steel, you put it in here, then you take let's go from the other side. And then you get yourself a little fill plug. Okay. Then you take a magnet and put it on the outside of the door, piece of plug to the door skin.
You can also put the magnet on the inside of the door.
And then just either TIG weld it or wire feed weld it all the way around. And this will help save any kind of distortions in the metal, any kind of warpage. You don't want to put too much heat on this very thin metal because you will warp it.
Also, where I drilled the holes for the C3 Corvette door mirror to attach to the door from, on the back side of this, and you can see it's concave, I took a piece of black steel gas pipe that you can find over at Lowe's, and I cut the thing, ripped it down the center on both sides, so I just had a half of a C-shaped piece of pipe about 3 inches long. And I had to flatten it a little bit with my anvil, but I still maintained the curve. And I got it to the same curvature of this beveled area. And I drilled 3 additional holes. And I held it to the back with a clamp. And then I did 3 plug welds in order to affix it permanently to the inside of the door. And what that's going to do for me is you can open and close the door all you want for years and years and years and not have to worry about any kind of fatigue cracks, because this is just 22 gauge metal. So opening and closing the door would cause the mirror to vibrate, and it would cause cracks eventually, and it would possibly fall off the door. So after placing the piece of pipe on the inside and plug welding it, I drilled through it using these same holes. And then I tapped it. And then once I put the bracket to hold the Corvette mirror to the door, I also utilized a lock nut on both of the screws that held the bracket to the door. So there's no chance of it ever coming off.
You could actually ruin the whole door. Especially if you're working on a van such as this. This van has the older style doors without the ridge going up the side of the door.
Also, when you take your plug and you want to weld it to the door, have a wet washcloth with you and just tack it and immediately quench it. And then do that for how many times you have to, is required to put the plug completely welded all the way around. And then when you go to grind it down, make sure you use a flap disc, because a flap disc will not get as hot as a regular grinding disc. Or you can even use a DA with 80 grit sandpaper.
Work fantastic. Of course, I didn't clean up the metal first, which I, would have done if this hadn't been for demonstration purposes. I would have sanded down the metal with 360 on a DA. Not that small piece. I would have cut out a section of sheet metal from an old body panel, and just punched them out. Even if the holes are smaller than the tool you wind up making, you could drill out the hole to this exact size, which I think it's like 1/2 inch. This is 1/2 inch, so buy yourself a 1/2 inch drill bit if that's the size of your tool that you wind up making. But you can actually do something like that if you wanted to fill door locks, but you'd have to drill a bigger hole. This is probably 3/4 of an inch. So you would drill a hole in the block of steel with just filler.
Yeah, it's definitely a big advantage rather than trying to fill in with using wire feed wire to fill in the hole. Always use a plug. It's much better. Anyway, let's get to painting this door. What I'm doing here is I'm wiping down the surface of the door with a beeswax tack cloth. And the purpose of the tack cloth is to remove any surface dust that may have accumulated on the surface of this door. These doors were washed the previous day with a garden hose under high pressure in order to blow out and wash out any kind of dirt from years and years and years of use that had gotten into that trackway here. If you don't do that, what happens is as soon as you pass over it with the spray gun with high pressure, it blows the dust right onto the surface of your freshly coated door, and you do not want that. So you gotta wipe it, all the paintable surface with the tack cloth, making sure that it's nice and clean. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Also, you notice that the floor is damp. And the purpose of the damp floor is to keep any dust that, stuck to the floor. When you step, you're going to kick up dust as you walk. And that's another thing you do not want. So I always hose down the floor prior to painting. Also, you'll notice this glare coming in from the window light. It's going to get a whole lot worse once I start painting, especially because I'm painting these doors white. White is highly light reflective. You can get snow blindness just looking at a bright white car in the sunlight. So I'm going to begin spraying down a light tack coat. And that just helps the secondary coats to adhere better to the surface of the door.
I'm using 2K Nissan acrylic enamel, which is the full thane 2K urethane single stage.
Single stage means I'm not putting a clear coat on top of it. Two-stage paint or base coat, clear coat. Two-stage paint is called base coat, clear coat, and you requires a flat base coat, and then you go over it with a clear coat in order to give the paint its gloss. Also, I want to point out the gun that I'm using is a DeVelbus spray gun, and that particular gun is a standard gun. It's not a high volume, low pressure or HVLP gun. And it's also a gravity feed gun because the cup that holds the paint is on top of the gun rather than below it. If the cup was below it, it'd be called a siphon feed gun. I highly recommend gravity feed gun over siphon gun. I have a siphon DeVelbus JGA 502 gun that I use for the primer. Both of my guns use 30 tips. I used to use the primer gun for painting all the time, but the reason I swapped up to the gravity feed gun is because when you're painting roofs and you got your arm stretched over the roof, sometimes that cup gets a little too heavy, because that's where I like to start on the surface of on the car. I always start at the roof, and then I go down to the trunk, and then I go to the hood before going to the sides. So the gun is always full of paint, and as you're doing the roof, the gun sometimes will get heavy, and you can actually scrape the roof of the gun with the siphon feed cup. Also, you have to maintain control of the air hose at all times, because you'll rub the painted area with the hose as well. So when I do the roof, I always have it thrown over my shoulder behind my head, and I hold it with my left arm. Okay, also I wanted to point out that if you watch what I was doing with the gun, I was going off the door and I was not releasing the trigger of the gun. I kept holding the trigger and letting the paint flow. And I would go the whole distance off the door, about 3 inches, and then off the door on that side about 3 inches, and overlapping 50% with each pass. And also, you got to keep the gun perpendicular to the door, maintaining your spray in a V shape up against the door. You don't want to tilt it so the spray is like this, because then you're going to have a heavier application of paint on the surface. So you don't want to do this. You want to do this as you're spraying. Keep it even. Any kind of tilting is going to give you a run. And so I walk the surface of the entire car when I do when I'm painting a whole car. I'll start at the front, and I'll walk the entire surface holding the trigger constantly from front to back, and then I'll go from back to front, overlapping my previous pass by 50%. After about 15 minutes or so, I'll come back and I'll do another coat. Depending on what temperature reducer that I'm using, you have fast, medium, and slow. Slow reducer is usually what you want to use in the summertime when you have a temperature greater than like 85. This day was 65, so I was using a fast reducer, or about 60, anywhere from 59 to 60. I forget what the temp was, but I used about a 15 to 20 minute flash time, and flash time means that you allow the reducer in the paint to evaporate from the painted surface, and the paint actually begins to dry. And I always take my finger and I'll touch the masking tape, because you're always going to have masking tape somewhere when you're painting. Touch the masking tape and then look at the tip of your finger and inspect it for any paint residue. You want it to still be sticky, but when you pull your finger away from the tape, press hard on the tape, pull your finger away, and hopefully you're not going to see any paint on your finger. If you still see paint or it comes out pretty wet, do not put another coat on until you can touch it, come away with no paint on your finger. Very important, because if you do that, you're going to get runs. if you come away with paint on your finger and you go ahead and put another coat. Flash time is extremely important. This is not a race that it's going to take hours to paint a car. I usually take, if I'm going to do a whole car, I'll take about figure 2.5, 3 hours to do the whole car. But it's very important. I can't stress enough how important waiting 20 minutes before coats. And if you're painting and you happen to notice that you missed a spot on your 50% pass, like on the side or whatever, do not try and cover that up then, okay? Because you're still going to put, consecutive coats on top of that. You will cover it. It's very important. Also, you can go heavier on the roof, on the trunk, and on the hood of the car because those are flat surfaces for the most part. But you do have to still exercise caution when you're going towards the edge of the roof because those usually curve over. You don't want to go heavy on the curved part of the roof. On the flat part of the roof is fine, but where it curves over towards the windshield, towards the rear window, towards the side windows, you don't want to go heavy there. See, the floor sounds like Velcro because it's still wet because I had just finished this job about 15 minutes prior to this. And I'm examining it to see if I have to do another coat. Oh, and that's another thing, guys. If you usually when you're getting ready to paint, you mix up a certain amount of paint, an estimated amount that you think is going to be necessary to cover the job that you're doing. A lot of times you're going to have extra paint. Now, if you're examining your work and it looks really, really good, just please throw that paint away. Do not say, well, I got it. I paid for it. I may as well put it on the car. No, don't do that because you're going to get runs. Also, another thing that's going to be an issue, if you don't have enough paint to cover like for instance, this door, what's going to happen is because you've already waited the 20 minutes, that paint is not going to bite into the paint and it's going to give you like an overspray effect that you're going to have to wet sand and buff out. Believe me, guys, it's not worth it. The only reason to keep the paint is if you had a run or something and you have enough paint to do the whole door, because once you mix the catalyst into the paint, it only has about a 4-hour lifespan. However, if you did add the catalyst to the paint, and like say it's like a quart or something, and that's what you needed for the job, and something happened to your gun malfunctioned, and you have to go get another gun, and you can't do it, paint it for at least 12, 13, 14, even 20 hours later, you can take that paint and put it in the refrigerator and then use it up to 24 hours later. I have done that in the past, and it does work. But if it's not refrigerated, catalyst paint only lasts about 4 hours.
The initial spray coat that I did is called the tack coat. It's extremely light. I like to go over it really light with a light tack coat. And then I go over it about 4 coats of medium. And this is the result. I can't see any evidence of any fill from the 3 large holes, half-inch holes that were somewhere around here, here, and here on either door. For reducer, what I used is low temp, which is fast.
One other thing, guys, I want to point out, very, 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 very important. This could be life-saving important. So pay attention. When you saw me painting and the room getting all cloudy, Okay, that's paint fumes in the air. It's highly volatile. I do not use a fan to blow it out. And the reason I don't use a fan is because they have electrical current igniting the coils on the motor in order to cause the blade to rotate. That little electrical spark could actually cause a flash explosion, which could kill you. So it's very important, do not use an exhaust fan unless it is certified for paint booth. My paint booth has a exhaust fan certified for paint booth. The spark is completely sealed off from any of the paint fumes that are in the paint booth. So your best bet is, like I said, flash time 15, 20 minutes. Once you come back in to do your next coat, the room is going to be clear. And leave the window open as long as it's not a windy day, and as long as you have a screen. Because if you don't, another thing that's going to happen is this paint smells very sweet. It will attract flies. It will attract bees. It will attract hornets, and they will land right on your freshly coated paint and leave a nice set of tracks, footprints in your paint, and that's something you don't want.
It's probably around 60 degrees right now, maybe 59. I give about 15 minutes or so between coats so the reducer can flash off. And then I like to touch a piece of the tape and see if I come away with any residue before applying another coat. And again, the half-inch fill holes are about here, somewhere around there, and here. And I got rid of any warpage from the welding process.
I'm going to show you a little bit more of the actual painting of these doors in this clip here. Also, pay attention to how rapidly my arm is moving. You don't want to go any slower than this, guys, because you will get runs. And again, you'll notice that I do not release the trigger, and I go completely off the door panel, not by much, a couple inches, but that's what you want to do. A lot of guys will release the trigger right on the edge of the door on both sides, and then they'll squeeze it again, and that initial squeeze of the trigger actually puts out more paint. And you're prone to runs and extra paint buildup on the edge of the door, which also you don't want, because that is very easy to chip off once it's dried. See, one spark in this room, or if you decide to light up a smoke, it could be your last smoke. Okay, I didn't want to show you too much of that because it's basically the same thing over and over again. But I do want to show you a few things. This is called Smoothie, and this is a fisheye eliminator, or at least reducer. Fisheye is what happens if you touch your primered surface prior to painting with your hands. Always keep your hands washed with soap, especially if you're going to be doing anything to the primered surface. Make sure they're clean, because if you have any oils at all on your hand, don't go rubbing your forehead and then start sanding again, because you'll leave your oils on the primered surface. And as soon as you go to paint, you're going to have what looks like a fisheye. The paint will not adhere to that area, and you could have hundreds of fisheyes all over your paint, which is one of the reasons why you want to do a tack coat to begin with, because that'll show you right away if you have oil contamination on your surface, and you want to clean that up prior to applying your first coat of paint. So I like this Fisheye Smoothie brand right here. This is very hard to find. I'm not even sure they're still in business. Last time I went to the paint store, they didn't even know what I was talking about. Hopefully you can read that. Look them up online, see if they're still, I haven't done it yet. I should have done it prior to this video, but see if they're still in business. And the paint I like to use is this Nason, in case you didn't see the label in the video earlier. It's made by DuPont. It's not as good as their Centauri brand, but I don't think they make the Centauri line any longer. I do have some, from that I bought years ago. It's still good. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I'm going to be painting my C5 Corvette black with a DuPont Centauri acrylic enamel, which is excellent paint. But anyway, it's been about 3 days since I painted these doors. I put them out in the sun so they can bake a while. And let's take a look at the finished result. Also, you'll notice that in the second to the last clip, I showed you what it looked like when the atmosphere was clear. you could see a little bit of orange peel on the doors. The paint was still basically wet. After it settles down a while, it flattens out nicely, and it leaves no orange peel. These doors now literally have no orange peel. They have not been wet sanded and buffed.
All painted. It's got very little dust on them. Any dust that you do see can easily be wet sanded and buffed out. It has virtually zero orange peel. Of course, this was done with a standard spray gun, not an HVLP. It's been 3 days since I painted them. But not bad for just painting in the garage. I have to get my Corvette out of the spray booth.
Anyway, guys, this just goes to show you you do not need a $50,000 spray booth to get a nice paint job. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It takes me a great deal of patience and time to not only paint, but also assemble these videos for you guys. So I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Leave a comment if you have any questions you want to ask me. Feel free to do that, and I will answer them. Also, leave me a thumbs up and a hit the bell icon, and subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. A lot of the viewers haven't. So do that if you want to see more videos like this. That lets me know that you guys are enjoying them and I'm not wasting my time uploading them. So anyway, have a great one. Great afternoon, great morning, great evening, whatever time it may be that you're watching this. And I just wanted to say, let's go, Brandon. Rick Steele Customs out.